Hey, what's up y'all, and welcome back to another Alternative Factuals video. So today I'm going to be covering a story, but not necessarily kind of going over each story individually. I'm going to treat it a little bit like how I did the Black Lightning video, which I will be getting back to, but this time I'm going to be covering an indie comic, which is technically, it was on Kickstarter, but it did so well on Kickstarter. Issues 2, 3, and I believe 4 is out right now. So you can definitely, actually no, not 4, but I'll get into details on how this kind of leads into an overall story. But essentially issues 1, 2, and 3 is out, and this is Chayoma. Now they did sponsor the video before, but this time I'm just reading this of my own, because I want to. So we're going to be covering a very interesting story, and at the same time this is a very in-depth story. I didn't realize the first issue how detailed this story really was until I actually read 2 and 3 and then some of the other comics that came with it. But before I do any of that, be sure to like, share, and of course subscribe so you don't miss content like this. And please leave a comment down below. Let me know any indie comics you want me to read, anything you want me to cover. And without further ado, let's kind of just jump into it. So I'm not going to give a super in-depth detail in terms of how exactly everything transpired word for word, but I'm going to go over issues 2 and 3 so that way you can kind of understand and kind of move along with me. But to recap, issue number 1, we found out that Chayoma was very much a super powerful warrior from her tribe, and she pretty much was feared. She was ruthless, she was out of control, and she wholeheartedly believed in the mother's vision. However, later on in that issue, we found out that there's very questionable tactics that the mother uses, because Chayoma had to steal from an ally that they assumed naturally that they didn't have to steal from, but the mother was obviously trying to take over and do things and be very manipulative. And Chayoma is, even though she's a ruthless, relentless warrior, she is someone who is honor bound and obviously has some sort of feelings of remorse. So in the second issue, that's when we kind of dive into how, how powerful she really is, but also the questions she had for mother. One of the questions was, why am I stealing this horn, this mystical horn, when in reality, we don't have to do that. They are our allies. Why are we stealing from our allies? And then once the mother gets frustrated and understands that, okay, Chayoma is starting to break from this ideology or this, teaching that I kind of gave her, I need to kind of correct her. So the mother actually sends the entire tribe on Chayoma, assuming that they're going to be able to take her out. And let me tell you, son, the panel that shows how she washed the entire tribe, I mean, she killed them, took off heads, cut off limbs, washed them, didn't even take any kind of damage. See, that's how powerful she really is, and the reason why the mother could not afford to lose her, because she can wash entire armies by herself. And that's one of the craziest things you gotta know about this. But ultimately Chayoma does confront her and does beat her, and then we kind of move on to the whole other aspect of this story. Now, I'm not going to give you specific details because the whole point is I want you to go by and read this, because even though they did sponsor the video before, reading these comics, these kind of lead into a larger, more, I guess, Avenger style in terms of, she meets up with other people like her and they kind of save the continent of Africa. But that's besides the point. We catch up and we find out that there's other tribes trying to find different forms of power, different forms of magic, and then also tapping into older versions of, dark and kind of malevolent evil magic. And it's one of the kings who feels like it's okay to kill a huge chunk of his own tribe just so that way he can satiate these old gods and obtain the powers based on whatever deal he made regarding how well and the prosperity of his tribe. So it's really jacked up, and we see that there's a lot of power and a lot of debate when it comes to how he rules and the kind of king that he is. He's obviously fat, so I think there's a lot of tie into being gluttonous and the fact that he just wants more and more and more and more, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to get more. But let's fast forward to issue number 3. Now issue number 3 kind of catches up with Chayoma when she's already on the run. She's kind of just walking around trying to figure out herself, her identity, what she wants to do, where she's going to go. And then she runs into essentially these assassins from a tribe that I think it's a tribe that she stole from, or it's definitely an enemy tribe, but I forget which one, to be honest with you. But I'll specify if I have to in the comments because in the right, for some reason I'm drawing a blank, but nonetheless, she is being chased down by these assassins and she has to confront them and fight them. Now, what's super dope about this fight is you see that she's not the only one who has very powerful forms of magic. Now, this is where I say anime has inspired a lot of people when it comes to ideas and concepts, because, you know, it's also very similar to African and Africanism when it comes to, you know, the ancestors and ancestral magic and powers. Because one of the cool things we see is that the assassins essentially have access to magic that are very similar to, like, if you've seen anime and Naruto, sealing kind of magic, where it's like they have combination spells that basically they combine them and then they take different various forms based on its configuration. I sound like I'm kind of talking a little bit about Seven Deadly Sins, you know, the seventh configuration, but it's kind of like that. You know, a lot of it is like, you know, fourth form, you know, and then they speak into whatever tongue that they speak in, and then it takes on this form of physical magic. So it's really, really dope. It resembles a lot like sealing magic, but besides that, basically they try to fight Chayoma, and this fight is good. It's 3v1, and they see that they can't really beat her, so they have to amp up from level 1 to level 2, I guess, combination forms of magic. So once they kind of do that, they see that, okay, she's not a regular person, but eventually she dodges, and then she does get kind of knocked out, but she falls into the river and she kind of just gets swept a long way down the river, and that's pretty much how that fight ends, because they don't chase her, 1, 2, they don't know where she is, and you know, that kind of moves on. Now she pretty much gets found by another village, and they're gonna pretty much take care of her and all that stuff. But one thing is, when we get in contact with these new villages and these new places in the story, one thing we find out is that a lot of these villages and a lot of these people, they kind of suffer from very similar issues, where either they have really bad kings, or, you know, just the tribe is doing really bad, or it's just like this power hungry kind of vacuum that's kind of taking place in the continent of Africa, and people having ulterior goals and ulterior motives in order to achieve more and more power. But ultimately there seems to be a shift in the, you know, the spiritual plane, where it seems like magic, or darker forms of magic, or older forms of magic, are starting to come back into play when it comes to tribes and their beliefs. So it seems like there's this overarching concept, because I did mention before, there is issues where that's going to be coming up after this, where you have Mbuze basically, and basically this guy having a family, and then also running into the newborn, where this is like the rise of this small group of people who are very powerful and who are very deadly, but also they serve a purpose to save the overall continent of Africa, like I stated before. So it's really, really dope, because it's like finding all these powerful black characters who each of them in their own right are extremely deadly, extremely dangerous, and then to have the ability to bring them all together for them to achieve a single purpose in order to kind of restore what Africa really was during this point in time that the story is taking place. So these are things that you want to kind of keep in mind when you're reading comics. It's not always just about the individual solo runs. Sometimes it's what they're kind of leading up to, and that's exactly what Chayoma issues 1 through 3 is kind of doing. It's leading you to an event that's going to be, you know, a whole continent-wide situation, and I think people need to kind of pay attention to this comic way more. I didn't want to give a ton of details because I didn't want to ruin it, because I want you guys to read this. I'm reading it, I've read it. These are things that you need to actually be on the lookout for, and these comics are doing really well. I think Mbuze won the Comic Panel First Award in 2019. So these comics are legit. They're not like some rinky-dink comic someone's just putting together. These are legitimate comics, and they're good. And I mean, the art style is super dope, and then the fighting and these scenes are really out of control. So I think we need to go and support them. But besides the whole support thing, this story and where they're going with this story is really super duper dope. It's a combination of different tribes that come together and form this, you know, the newborn, where in a sense where it's Chayoma is in the group, but you see other people who are, I think, essentially just as powerful as her, and probably in some cases maybe more powerful. But they tell the stories and they introduce new characters, so that way you can kind of get attached to them, but also see what each of them bring to the table when it comes to characters like Chayoma and people who are going to be involved in the future comics involving the newborns. But let me know in the comments down below how you feel about stuff like this. I didn't go over it like I did Black Lightning. This wasn't like an essential me kind of reading, you know, more or less majority of the details to you. I want you guys to read it. But what we're going to do is actually go over some details so that way you're able to follow the story a little bit more fluently. And these details are mostly concerned regarding, you know, characters and the character guides that come along with this comic. So I'm going to kind of break down some of the details. Like I said, I don't want to give an overwhelming amount of details because if I tell you everything, there's no point in going to read the comic. But I want you to kind of focus on kind of three aspects of this story. The Jangura, who are essentially the tribe of Chayoma, and essentially the Basoro, which is another tribe, the descendants of Bukuku. And the same thing for the Jangura as well. They are from descendants of the Bakuku as well. And then you have the Rahanga. Essentially, these are the gods or the part of the creator, the godfather of essentially the whole dynasty, and they are comprised of, like, you know, demigods. But so the Jangura essentially have different sets of beliefs, and they're kind of have this whole thing where they're trying to obtain power. And much like the Jangura, the Basoro, they also are trying to obtain power, but this power is more or less in response to, you know, the elder gods, old magic and old gods. And that also involves King Chuba, who was the king I mentioned earlier, that he ultimately is a little gluttonous. He was willing to sacrifice his own people in order to obtain certain abilities and powers. And this is also the same dude who kind of deployed these Basoro assassins who have like these ceiling-like forms of magic. Now, what's really cool is when you go back to the Jangura tribe, Chayoma, she's often described as being this, you know, captain, elite assassin, and a Melezi spirit, which means there's something else going on with her powers that are more tied to, you know, the spiritual aspect more than it is regarding her physicality. Now, I say this because you have characters like basically Umukama, who's like the ruler and overseer of like the Great Lakes of the region, essentially the area in which both of these tribes reside. And then you have Oin, who is like the first Melezi protector of the earth realm. Now, if you pay attention, it says the first Melezi, and then also Chayoma is a Melezi spirit. So I think they have some correlation. Since he is a protector of the realm, there's a really good chance that Chayoma, her destiny is to protect the realm as well, but she just doesn't know it, and a lot of her identity or what her destiny was pretty much lost when she was found and picked up by the Jangura. So these are details we need to keep in mind when it comes to the comic itself and also the progression of this comic. Just keep in mind the Jangura are essentially eldest descendant of Bukuku, inhabitants of the Kovu realm, and then the Basoro are descendants of Bukuku as well, but they're also just another tribe. And this also correlates with the return of the old gods, elder magic, and also with King Chuba, who is responsible for sending those Basoro assassins. And remember, the Jangura is more or less related to Chayoma and a lot of her beliefs and basically how she was raised. And the mother, who is Niriyama, who is a citizen of Katara as well, she is involved in the Jangura, and she's essentially on the left side here. So what's really dope is that you can see, like I said, a lot of this ties into it. Everyone may seem like they're kind of separated in some ways of the story, but ultimately they all kind of have this connection when it comes to power, magic, and beliefs, because they're all kind of coming from the same source. But that's some of the details I wanted to give you regarding the story, things to help make this story a lot more palatable, a lot more enjoyable, and also just a lot more understandable, because even in comic books, you know, a lot of things can be very misconstrued and you have to have a little bit more details to kind of tell the story on the back end. So let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Let me know if you enjoy details like this. Let me know if you enjoy these kind of breakdowns where I don't give away too much details, but give you the overall kind of idea about each of the stories when it comes to the issues and kind of where they're going and their build up. Let me know in the comments, and I hope to see you later on. Peace out.